Hi all. Today we will be looking at an important, possibly even seminal, event that shook Europe during the otherwise quiet 1820s. This was the Greek War of Independence. Not only did Greek independence result in a free Greek state in Europe, it also played an important part in ending the Congress system that had emerged after the fall of Napoleon in 1815. Like Serbia, Greece had been conquered by the Ottoman Empire in the 15th century. The following centuries of Ottoman rule are often considered a time of stagnation in Greek history, with cities such as Athens languishing as irrelevant villages. It is important to note, however, that the Greek presence in the Ottoman Empire was not limited to the lands of ancient Greece, and that Greek culture flourished in many places, including Istanbul, which was not only the capital of the empire, but was the seat of the leader of the Greek Orthodox Church, the Patriarch. Greeks enjoyed a relatively privileged status in the empire due to their high levels of literacy and were often given jobs in the Ottoman administration. Most Greeks remained Christian, although thousands did convert to Islam in order to avoid military conscription and Christian taxes. Greek uprisings did occur from time to time, and the mountainous regions of Greece were difficult for the Ottomans to assert any strong rule over. On the whole, the Greek lands were relatively stable until the 18th century. During this time, there was a significant migration of Greeks outside of the empire, just like with the Serbs. The increasingly wealthy Greek mercantile class wished to send their sons west to gain a better education. These Greeks heading to Western Europe, were educated in the latest radical ideals of enlightenment and nationhood. They also taught their fellow students about their Greek homeland, helping to encourage the increased interest in ancient Greece that swept through educated Western opinion at the time. Within the Ottoman Empire itself, Greeks in the 18th century were increasingly ascendant. In particular, the Phanariotes, named after the quarter of Istanbul in which the Patriarch lived, became increasingly important. The Phanariotes came to power as a result of the Ottomans' need for skilled negotiators as the power of their empire declined. No longer in a position to dictate peace terms to their enemies, they now had to rely on diplomats skilled in negotiation who might mitigate the consequences of defeat, and these were drawn from the ranks of the Phanariotes. Phanariote grantees monopolized the post of chief interpreter to the Porte, effectively the Ottoman foreign minister. They were also given the position of admiral of the Ottoman fleet, with admirals acting as governors of the Greek islands in the Aegean Sea, as well as commanding the Ottoman navy. Phanariote Greeks were also given control of the territories of Moldavia and Wallachia, the Danubian principalities that today form Romania. Not only did the Greek mercantile middle class grow rich in the late 18th century, they developed into an effective naval combat force. The reason for this was the development of a substantial merchant marine based on the three islands of Hydra, Spetses, and Psara. This merchant marine became rich and well trained due to their role as smugglers evading the continental blockade imposed by Great Britain during the period of the French Revolution and the Napoleonic Wars. The existence of a reservoir of trained sailors proved to be a great advantage once the War of Independence broke out, and Greek ships became a formidable weapon against the cumbersome ships of the Ottoman fleet. Before then, however, the Greek merchants also heavily invested in their hometowns, building schools and libraries, where ideas of Greek liberation were disseminated and tales of ancient Greece resuscitated. Naming conventions of ancient Greece, long lost to legend, were also brought back. Most Greek peasants remained uninterested, however, tending to their sheep, whilst the Greek diaspora and the rich merchants embraced the legacies of the past. The first Greek to call for action against the Ottomans in the revolutionary era was the interesting figure of Rigas Velestinlis, or Rigas Veros, who was not even born a Greek, but was a Vlach who had adopted Greek culture, a process known as Hellenization. Rigas actively began to plan for an armed revolt against the Turks following a spell living in 1790s Vienna. In Vienna he had come under the influence of the French Revolution and published a number of revolutionary writings intending to distribute them to help stimulate a pan-Balkan uprising against the Ottomans. These tracts proposed the establishment of a revived Byzantine Empire, but one in which monarchical institutions would have been replaced by republican institutions on the French model. Rigas's insistence on the cultural predominance of the Greeks, however, and of the use of the Greek language, meant that his schemes stirred little interest among the other people of the Balkan Peninsula, such as the Serbs and the Bulgarians. Before he even set foot onto Ottoman soil, Rigas was betrayed by a fellow Greek to the Habsburgs, who promptly handed him over to the Ottomans. He was subsequently strangled to death in 1798. Whilst Rigas's conspiracy was a miserable failure, it served as an inspiration to future generations of Greek nationalists. A semi-independent Greek state was established in the small Ionian Islands during the Napoleonic Wars, following their conquest by the UK. Although a British military official ruled the islands, the Greek population there were granted a constitution which provided them with a number of rights. In 1814, the so-called Friendly Society was founded in Odessa, a city that today is in Ukraine. The founders of the society had the specific aim of laying the foundations for a coordinated armed uprising against the Turks, although what was to come after that was uncertain. Those who betrayed the conspiracy were ruthlessly killed by its members. Initially, the Society's attempts to recruit members throughout the Greek world met with little success, but from 1818 onward it became increasingly important with the Greek diaspora. The conspirators hoped for the support of the Romanians and the Bulgarians, just as Riga had done, but once more there was little enthusiasm for their project on the part of the other Balkan peoples, who saw the Greeks as privileged within the empire and feared that Greek enthusiasm for the ecclesiastical and cultural Hellenization of other Christians would affect the freedom of their own people. The first 3 decades of the 19th century were marked by conflict in the Ottoman Empire, as the Sultan sought to gain supremacy over rebellious warlords who had set up in the provinces. In 1821, Greek adventurer Alexander Ypsilantis, a leader in the Friendly Society and a veteran of the Napoleonic Wars, took advantage of the chaos to launch an invasion of the Ottoman Empire from Russia. He gathered together a so-called "sacred band" of Greek emigrants and students to fight his cause. Due to geography, Ypsilantis issued his stern call to arms not from Athens or the foothills of the Greek mountains, but instead from Iasi in today's Romania. Unsurprisingly, his uprising failed, as the local Romanians still hated the Greeks for the period of their rule in the country. The sacred band were largely annihilated, and Ypsilantis would die soon after in a Habsburg prison. Surprisingly, however, the dream of Greek independence would not die, and in fact in the Peloponnese mountains of Greece itself a simultaneous revolt was brewing. A meeting of chieftains from all over Greece took place in January 1821, where a revolutionary priest encouraged all present to agree to go to war. In an outbreak of sudden and extreme violence, the Ottoman forces were caught by surprise and retreated to the coastal cities. The naval skills of the Greek volunteer sailors that we discussed earlier ensured that the Greek islands fell one by one under rebel control. In April, a rebel offensive captured Athens and forced the Ottoman garrison to hole up in the Acropolis, which was laid under siege. Whilst Muslims in Greece were targeted in attacks, Greeks living throughout the rest of the Ottoman Empire were also subject to mass executions, pogroms, and the destruction of churches. The most severe atrocities occurred in the so-called Constantinople massacre of 1821. The Orthodox Patriarch Gregory V was executed on the orders of the Sultan, despite opposing the Greek revolts. The execution of the Patriarch caused outrage throughout Europe and resulted in an increase in support for the Greek rebellion. Philhellenic or pro-Greek committees sprang up in Europe and the United States, raising money for the Greek prosecution of the war, as well as for the relief of the war's victims. For example, the survivors of the Great Massacre on Chios in 1822, immortalized by the French painter Eugene Delacroix, received aid from sympathetic West Europeans. Public sympathy in Western Europe was translated into more concrete expressions of support with the arrival in Greece of the Philhellene volunteers, the best known of whom was the British poet Lord Byron, who had travelled extensively in Greece before the uprising. The military contribution of these volunteers was limited, and some became disillusioned when they discovered that the reality in Greece differed from the idealized vision that they held as students. Byron himself died of a fever in 1824, though he remains a Greek hero to this day. Early successes in the war encouraged the Greeks to pass two constitutions in 1822 and 1823, both of which were very democratic for the time they were written. However, soon serious fractions began to emerge in the Greek side and a civil war broke out between a number of different factions. Generally, Greeks were divided between those who advocated for a Western-style nation-state and those who wanted to continue the decentralized chieftain system and saw the war with the Ottomans in terms more religious than they were national. However, there were also tensions within these factions between military figures, church figures, islanders, mainlanders, etc. Meanwhile, the Ottoman side received a powerful ally in the form of Muhammad Ali, the ruler of Egypt, and his son Ibrahim Pasha, who were promised territorial rewards in return for their assistance in suppressing the revolt. Ibrahim Pasha invaded Greece in 1825 and gained numerous gains for the Egyptian forces as the Greeks began desperately appealing for foreign aid. In 1826 the Acropolis was once more besieged. This time Ottoman forces attacked and took Athens off of the Greeks. In 1827 Greek regular troops numbered less than 5,000 men compared to 25,000 Ottomans and 15,000 Egyptians. The Greek government was also virtually bankrupt by this point. Many of the key fortresses on what little territory it controlled were now in Ottoman hands. At first the great powers had been unwilling to intervene in Greece due to their commitments to upholding the Congress system of stable empires in Europe. However, the Congress system broke down as the powers became wary of the others circling the situation, and each came around to Greek independence as a way to increase their own influence and at the same time thwart the influence of their enemies in the Eastern Mediterranean. The powers were also worried about the damage being done in Greece, which posed a massive threat to their commercial interests in the area. In 1826 and 1827, Britain, Russia, and France all agreed to bring an end to the war by forcing an armistice in Greece, just as the Ottomans were about to make gains. The powers informed the Sultan that if they failed to accept the armistice within a month, each of the powers would officially recognize the independent Greek Republic and would take military action to enforce their demands. The British sent Vice Admiral Sir Edward Codrington, a hero of the Battle of Trafalgar, to enforce their treaty. Codrington was a sympathizer with the Greek cause who was eager to fight the Ottomans. When the Sultan rejected his armistice proposals, Codrington attacked the Ottoman Egyptian navy at Navarino, sinking 60 ships whilst losing no British, French or Russian vessels. Mass celebrations spread all over Greece as news of the victory was made public. The Ottomans and the Egyptians remained entrenched on land, and Sultan Mahmud declared that he would never acquiesce to Greek independence. Ottoman troops, however, were forced to leave Greece following a Russian invasion in the north of the empire in 1829, which reached as far as the gates of Istanbul. Meanwhile, a French expedition in the Peloponnese in 1828 drove out the Egyptians. The Ottomans now agreed upon Greek independence, but a long negotiation process followed, in which the powers all competed for their own gains. The Greeks elected Count Ioannis Kapodistrias as their president, and also proclaimed that the third constitution of the independent and also proclaimed their third constitution of the independence period. Besides overseeing the negotiation of the boundaries of his new state, Kapodistrias also had to re-establish infrastructure in a country that had been ravished by war for nearly a decade. The president resented the democratic constitution and abolished it before being assassinated in 1831. The great powers granted themselves extensive rights of intervention in Greece and determined that the new country should become a monarchy. They chose Prince Otto of Bavaria as the new king of Greece. Because he was still a minor, the great powers determined that, until Otto came of age, the country was to be ruled by three Bavarian regents, whilst the army was to be composed of Bavarians alone. This period of the Bavarokratia was a time of conflict, for the regents showed little sensitivity for the mores of Otto's adopted countrymen, and imported European models of government, law and education without regard to local conditions. The legal and educational systems were thus heavily influenced by German and French models, as was the church settlement of 1833, which ended the traditional authority of the patriarch and subjected the church to state control. The following decades would see intense conflict between the authoritarian king and the liberals in Greece, as well as between British, French and Russian factions in the country. Modern Greek history would come to be defined by conflict and instability, as we shall revisit in later lectures.